also it still shows 0.
Okay, so it seems that we are live now. So I suppose I better start by welcoming everybody who is out in this session. It's a little bit confusing because I cannot see how many are actually attending, but maybe Tuomo can comment on this afterwards. Welcome very much to the session on the Green Deal call Info Day Area 8. So in this area, we are addressing the zero pollution, toxic free environment. And there are 2 topics actually under this call. What we wanted to do today was to introduce, so we will introduce the 2 topics to you, but we also wanted to give you the policy setting of the 2 topics so that you can better have a feeling for why these 2 topics were deemed important in the current settings. I would also have liked to introduce all the speakers to you now, but we have at the moment slight connection problems, and I only have 1 speaker present at the moment. So maybe I can ask Tuomo Karjalainen to introduce himself. Please, Tuomo.
Hello, you all. I'm the dinosaur in environment and health research. Has been in this area since 2002. And some of you may not know, but we do have environment and health research activities ongoing for at least 20 years, and we have spent over 1.5 billion euros on environment and health research. And this means basically over 500 projects. Many of these projects have dealt with chemical risks. For example, in this area, we have funded 150 projects, over €500 million. And we have spent an additional 300 million on nano risks. So this large number of projects, of course, have contributed to many EU policies. And these 2 topics that we are dealing with today kind of fall under the umbrella of environment and health, although it is, of course, very cross-cutting with the environmental research as well. So that was my little introduction.
Okay, thank you very much. So one important disclaimer, just to show one important disclaimer, is that whatever we present in slides to you today about the 2 topics is, of course, only the published text is the valid reference. Now, just moving through the 2 other speakers we're still waiting for to join are Valentina Bertato and Peter Koritar, both of them from DG Environment. But we have, as I said before, we have some connection problems. So what we will do is, instead of going through the agenda as we had presented it here, where we wanted to starting by set the policy scene, we will actually start by introducing the topics to you. I would like to let everybody know that if you have questions, please address them in the Q&A field, where you can then, you type your question and you publish your question, and then I will take note of them and make sure that we answer them in the question and answer breaks. In this case, Tuomo, I will hand over to you. Can you please start presenting, and we will just skip some of the slides. Here are we. And please start presenting the first topic.
Okay, thank you. This topic, the first topic we are talking about, is called Innovative Systemic Zero Pollution Solutions to Protect Health, Environment and Natural Resources from Persistent and Mobile Chemicals. So it's a very complicated title, but a very important topic. And this topic was actually, the text for the call and the topic was co-created between DG Research and Innovation and other DGs, relevant DGs in the European Commission. And it was DG Environment in particular that was very active in co-creating the core text. So the first part of the core text is the specific challenge. And of course, there are some raison d'etre for this topic. And one of them is the fact that the European general public is very concerned about chemical exposures. And this is the first bullet point here. There was a Eurobarometer survey published just this year. It was the number 501 that showed that half of the people who surveyed are worried about, for example, waste and its impact on the environment. 88% of the people think that microplastic is an issue of concern, and 85% of people thought that the impact of chemicals present in everyday products is a concern for them. So this topic will hopefully answer some of these concerns. The other reason is, of course, the regulatory needs that were identified in the European Green Deal, and especially in the part that refers to the toxic-free environment. If you read the communication for the European Green Deal, you will find there the following text. The regulatory framework will need to rapidly reflect scientific evidence on the risks posed by endocrine disruptors, hazardous chemicals in products, combination effects of different chemicals, and very persistent chemicals. So the two of the topics that we are talking about today are focused on combination effects of chemicals and very persistent chemicals. So these come directly from this communication. Our colleague, hopefully when she can log in, will explain why these persistent mobile chemicals are important. So this topic is indeed focused on this particular group of chemicals. And we give the persistent perfluorinated compounds as an example, because this is indeed the so-called, these are so-called forever chemicals, very persistent and mobile. However, the applicants can focus on other persistent and mobile chemicals. So it's not excluded. This is just an example. We also mentioned here, I think, or maybe in the next page, but we know, for example, that through biomonitoring activities, the European public is indeed exposed to these chemicals. So it is a widespread problem. The exposure is decreasing for some of these chemicals, and for some others, it is increasing. It is a priority substance in the European Human Biomonitoring Initiative. This is our very large project or program that is trying to harmonize approaches to human biomonitoring in Europe. It's a very costly issue, and you have here an example published by the Nordic Council of Ministers in 2019. Concerning the potential health effects, there is quite a long list of suspected or even proven health effects, but these include, for example, altered metabolism, impact on the blood pressure, fertility, reduced fetal growth, an increased risk of obesity, and reduced ability of the immune system to fight infections. Of course, the very last point is very relevant in this current pandemic situation. So, in the scope, on this particular slide, we describe what is in general in scope in this topic. Of course, we want to establish new knowledge, explore new or improved technologies or innovative solutions to protect the health and the environment from these kinds of chemicals. We want to also advance a little bit our knowledge on health impacts and also on environmental effects. So we hope that the applicant will address on a very specific pollution problem that can be easily tackled. And the solutions that will be proposed by the applicants should lead to cost-effective prevention, possibly monitoring approaches and results, and also to some mitigation possibilities. They should also try to study the environmental faith and try to find ways to prevent the negative impacts on human health and the environment. So this is a very cross-cutting topic between these two domains. And it is expected that the technology readiness level is be between 4 and 6. So 4 is a technology which is validated in a lab. 5 and 6 are technology validated in relevant environments. Here on the next page, then we have a rather long list of specific issues that can be addressed by the applicants. And there's a very important caveat here within parentheses in the first line. The applicants are not obligated to address all the bullet points that are here. They can be selective and come up with an attractive package that makes sense and which is feasible within a relatively short time period. Because with this Green Deal call, we are hoping to get some of the results rather quickly. So we have examples here again that are relevant to what we saw on the previous slides. Get some insight into the uses, sources, and environmental fate of these chemicals. Cost-effective methods to analyze and model of these chemicals in different media. Also carry out possibly environmental and human biomonitoring of these chemicals. And I will show you in the next slide the relevance of HPM for EU in this context. Gather some information on the toxicity and toxicokinetic information. And of course here we always promote animal-free approaches to allow the characterization of risks to human health and the environment. Detect specific pollution problems and their sources. Research and development of bioremediation technologies for soil and water. And this includes sources of drinking water that are contaminated by these substances. And we know that, for example, we don't have a lot of information about the presence of these chemicals in drinking water. There are some studies, of course, showing how they are found, for example, in surface waters. Then development and improvement of models to predict and assess long-term trends and risks for persistent mobile substances. And finally, development of best practices for the management and treatment of waste, soil and water containing these substances. So it's quite an ambitious program and a lot of interesting and relevant subtopics to be addressed. And we are hoping that the solutions will be really fit for real life challenges. And they should be cost effective and easily implementable. I'm sorry, I can't see the last points. Yes, so of course, in this kind of research, we have a number of end users, potential end users. And of course, what comes to mind, for example, here is that the regulatory community certainly will be interested in the results. But of course, the general public also is expecting some possible results from these projects. Then we come to the section on expected impact. So here we have the impact on the medium term, short medium term would be to provide a foundation for prevention and mitigation solutions based on better understanding of the sources and distribution of these chemicals. Access to models of the environmental fate and degradation pathways, and the improved understanding of relevance for human and environmental health. Provide solutions and support decision-making for addressing large-scale diffuse contamination of water and soil with these chemicals. And this can include some work on combination effects, contribute to achieving the toxic-free environment through solutions for better load reduction, bioremediation, and detection techniques. Improve risk assessment, then support, of course, policy developments. And here we really were hoping to have our colleagues presenting this very latest development. There are a lot of activities ongoing at this point. We have the new chemical strategy, which is planned to be published on the 14th of October. And there will be, for example, attached to this particular strategy, a staff working document on PFAS. And there will be also, there's work ongoing on the Zero Pollution Action Plan. And the Circular Economy Action Plan was published already last year in March. So this one you can already find on the internet very easily. So when the applicants are addressing the expected impacts, of course, they should address as much as possible and as in a detailed fashion as possible all the expected impacts. As you know, or many of you may know, that one of the criterions in the evaluation is impact, and it's 1/3 of the total score. So it's very important to very thoroughly address what are the expected impact in the call. However, the people can also propose additional expected impacts beyond what is mentioned here on the list. Of course, the data that will be produced should be fair, which means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And open access to publication is, of course, nowadays a standard, and also open access to research data is important to consider. Here in this particular call, we have an obligation. All the monitoring data, the chemical exposure data should be shared via the platform IPChem. This is a platform that was produced especially for the HPM4EU, but it's also has been collecting chemical exposure data for many other EU projects and other sources, even at the national level. And it was technically developed by the European Commission's Joint Research Center. I already mentioned earlier that the human biomonitoring activities should take advantage of what has been done within this European Human Biomonitoring Initiative, HPM4EU, and the reference laboratories that have been established should be used when relevant and possible. Our colleagues in the Planet Directorate also told us that it would be good if the applicants to this particular call would make use of the services offered through Copernicus data, especially the Copernicus climate change and atmospheric services. And they have a specific website from which you can find additional information. And if you need more information, we can also try to put you in contact with the relevant service. I'm very happy that we can now see our colleague, Peter Corrigan from DG Environment. But I will continue with the topic descriptions and what is required. So this is a research and innovation action, and the available budget is for 40 million euros for this particular topic. And the individual proposals submitted is recommended that they be between 8 and 12 million euros. In this particular case, we did not put any suggestion or obligation that the selected project coordinate the activities afterwards. But of course, this is not excluded, and I would say that it's still recommended that they would maybe later work together if it's relevant and possible.
Okay, Tuomo, I think I can see that Valentina is now fully connected, and I would suggest before we take the question and answers that we also take the policy part, which is related to this topic. So if we just move back a little bit in the slides, and I'm sorry for moving forward and backwards. So I would like to invite Valentina to shortly introduce herself and then to present the slides she had about persistent and mobile chemicals, because a lot of the questions, or some of the questions which have been raised meanwhile in the chat, might find answers in this presentation. Valentina, please shortly introduce yourself and then the floor is yours. If you can move the slides, it's fine. If not, you just let me know and I will move them for you.
Thank you, Sophie. Good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, good. So if you can please move the slides because I don't hear any arrows. And for the introduction, I'm Valentina Bertato. I work in DG Environment in the Sustainable Chemicals Unit, where I'm dealing with the restriction under the chemicals legislation, REACH, and under the Stockholm Convention. So as you already introduced, I'm going to present why we believe that persistent and mobile chemicals are a concern and why we need more research on them. So we have here persistence combined with mobility that leads to a risk to contaminate water resources, because these substances, they can move from the soil to the water. And then once they are in the water, they are very difficult to remove, and this is to very high costs for water treatment plants. I have seen there have been a few questions on if we know what are persistent and mobile chemicals, which chemicals can be considered as persistent and mobile. We have some criteria that have been proposed by the German Federal Environment Agency. I provide the link in the presentation. So these are, for the time being, indicative criteria, but we have already started to use them under the legislation REACH, and indeed we have already identified two substances as HVAC, substances of very high concern, on the basis of persistence and mobility. So next slide, please. One example of persistent and mobile chemicals that we are already addressing and that have a lot of relevance in these days are PFAS. They've already been mentioned by Tuomo, I have heard. So this is a very large group of chemicals. There are almost 5,000 known, and they are used in many applications, from textiles, treatment, to firefighting foams, paper treatment, just to name a few. We have some of them that are already restricted in the EU via REACH regulation and also internationally under the Stockholm Convention. But what we have been seeing is that the restricted substances have been replaced by alternatives that belong to the same group. We are now looking into these alternatives, and we see concerns due to persistence and mobility, and in some cases toxicity. Indeed, the two chemicals that I mentioned before that have been identified as substances of very high concern for persistence and mobility, they are alternatives to the PFAS that have already been restricted. At the political level, we have the Council conclusion from June 2019 that is asking the Commission to develop an action plan to restrict all non-essential uses of PFAS. And a similar message is contained in the resolution of the European Parliament on the chemical strategy that is very recent from July 2020. So as Tuomo already anticipated, in the chemical strategy that is due to be adopted and published by mid of October, we will include actions on PFAS with a specific PFAS action plan, and also in general on persistent and mobile chemicals. So next slide, please. What are the problems we have now when we try to regulate the PFAS? So the first problem is the very high number of chemicals, and we have very limited information on the specific substances. This has led us to conclude that we cannot continue regulating them substance by substance, but we need to address them as a group. This is what is happening. A group of member states, in collaboration with the European Chemical Agency, is working on a restriction proposal for the whole group of PFAS. Of course, if we have a regulation for all the PFAS, we need also to be able to measure them. So we need analytical methods in different matrices and sufficiently sensitive to measure them at low concentration. Because these substances, they are often used at very low concentration, or they are present as impurities. Then we need data on environmental concentration and also from biomonitoring, especially for the PFAS, the new ones that have been replacing those that we have regulated. We need this data for the risk assessment in order to be able to justify future restrictions. Another problem we have with PFAS is the presence of a very high number of contaminated sites. These substances have been used, for example, in firefighting foams, and firefighting foams have been used all around the world, not only for fighting fires, but also for training. And then many of the contaminated sites we have been contaminated because of the use of fluorinated firefighting foams. Decontamination is very expensive, and there are technical difficulties. This is why we need new technologies also to deal with this issue of legacy contamination. And then last but not least, the waste management. So PFAS are present in industrial waste from the production of fluorinated polymers. They are present in wastewater. Once the contaminated water is treated, we have water with higher concentration that also needs to be treated. We have escalated soils, and we also have many consumer goods that contain PFAS. Goods that we use every day, from our Teflon pans to textiles. And these, they cannot be treated as normal waste because in a municipal incinerator, PFAS are not destroyed. They are persistent. A normal incinerator cannot break the bond between chlorine and fluorine. Sorry, between carbon and fluorine. So I think this was the last one.
Yes, thank you very much, Valentina. I hope this answered some of the questions which we saw coming. Maybe if we just look at the other questions which are in the Q&A at the moment. There is a question about the TRL 4 to 6, meaning that this is the starting TRL, or if this is the TRL the project must reach. And I think, Tuomo, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry. I have some difficulty reading. Yes, I think that's the idea. I think the it was our colleagues in the other DGs that put this in to make sure that there would be some progress in the technological development of these approaches.
Yes, so the idea is really to reach the stage of TRL 4 to 6 so that the results produced by this topic and by the projects resulting from this topic will have useful outcomes. One specific platform, there's another question about data, and I think one specific platform which we have mentioned is the IPChem platform for monitoring data. But apart from that, you can then also explore other existing platforms and other means of making data accessible.
I think
Yeah.
I have to comment, IPChem also covers, it has a module on environmental data, I think.
Yes.
And I think one module is on indoor air, even indoor air pollutants.
Yes. If there are any questions about IPChem, I also know we have Peter present. He can answer any of these questions afterwards. We then had a question about if the development of alternative compounds. This is not included in this topic. So it's really about detecting the substances and promoting ways of remediating, of solving the pollution problems which we're encountering by these substances. The topic as such is not addressing the development of alternative compounds. The TRL issue, we have answered this. I can see there's a question. So there is a question saying, are technology solutions aimed to capture and remove and technology to destroy the pollutants part of this call? Tuomo, do you would like to answer this one?
Yes, I would say, at least in my opinion, it's within the scope of the call.
Yes. Now, there are some questions which also address the fact if you need to address all the different bullets listed under the scope. And I think if you look at the slides, but also if you listen to Tuomo's presentation, the aim is you can choose which of these bullets you think are relevant to cover in a proposal you will be putting together. And then I think Valentina answered the question about what we understand about persistent and mobile chemicals. So that should answer some of the other questions which I can see currently occurring.
One question about should projects cover environmental biomonitoring? It clearly says in the text under scope that environmental and human biomonitoring, and bio is within parentheses, monitoring of persistent and mobile chemicals. Clearly, these two aspects can be covered.
Yes, I will just look at the chat to see if there is nothing new in the chat. So I think we have all the questions on the Q&A. And I think we have addressed most of these questions. I think the best advice is really to go and read the topic text very carefully and to analyze everything which is written in the topic text. And as Tuomo said before, when we evaluate proposals, we always look at, there are three criteria. It's excellence, so the science, the impact, how do you describe how you will contribute to the impact we expect from the future projects. And then the last section is about the implementation. So how do you manage and how will you ensure that you actually implement a good proposal? These are the three criteria which are standard evaluation criteria on the Horizon 2020. I think the presentations will all be available. So they should then afterwards be available for download so that you can go through it again. With this, I think there is a question about microplastics in water and soil. I think we do not consider, I'm looking at Valentina. Valentina, we do not consider microplastic mobile and persistent chemicals. So I think microplastics are not covered by this topic. But maybe Valentina, do you want to come in on this?
For the persistency, they are for sure persistent. It's one of the concerns of microplastics. We could consider them in a way mobile because we know that they can be released into one environmental compartment and then move to the other. But I think that it was not the target we had in mind for this call. I think there are other calls that concern microplastics.
Yes. As you might know, we have just had a series of, other calls on the Horizon 2020 has extensively addressed the microplastic topics.
And there's a question about which other compounds could be addressed apart from PFAS. So I leave this to also Valentina.
I mean, if you go to the link I have indicated with the criteria, you will find some ideas of the physical-chemical properties of a substance to be considered persistent and mobile. And then I think that the UBA also worked on a list of chemicals that could fulfill the criteria. Since I'm speaking, I see here a comment, plastics are not chemicals. We consider microplastics to be polymer. We have also an ongoing restriction on microplastics, and polymers are chemicals, and such as all the other chemicals, they are covered by REACH.
Yeah. And then there is a question about if PFAS is mandatory to be addressed in the projects. No, PFAS is just one of the examples of these kind of chemicals which the topic is targeting. There is a question about the budget, which is a little bit surprising to me. I don't think the budget is, well, the budget is about, it's 40 million in total available for this topic. And then we have, we expect proposals, or we suggest that proposals requesting between 8 to 12 million would be, could achieve the objectives of this call. I will maybe let Tomo intervene a little bit on this also.
This is not at all the first time. We had, for example, a call for endocrine disrupting chemicals testing, which had a budget of 50 million. And we had a call to develop the exposome concept, where we also had a budget of 50 million. And actually, at the end of the day, we had some additional funding for it. And the HPN4EU, which is a very large initiative, also has a budget of EU contribution of 50 million. So this is not at all the first time.
Yes. So I suggest, if there are no further questions at this stage coming in through the Q&A, I would just like to remind everybody to put the questions not necessarily in the chat, but in the Q&A tab, so that it's easier for us to keep a track of them. If there are no further questions coming in at this moment, I suggest that we move on, and this time we will start the presentations in the right order. We will start, I will invite Peter Korita to take the floor and shortly introduce himself, and then he will talk to you about mixtures of chemicals.
Good afternoon all, and hello, and I hope you can hear me. So if you can hear me, can you please confirm? Super. My name is Peter Koritar, and I am a policy officer in the chemicals unit in DG Environment, and I am working on subjects like the mixtures topics and also preparation of the chemical strategy. And in my presentation, I would like to give you a little bit of background on the policy background on the chemical mixtures and why are chemical mixtures a concern to start with. So clearly chemicals are coming into the environment, all of them. Also humans are exposed to many chemicals at the same time. It can be also that we are exposed to chemicals sequentially, but at the end they are present in us at the same time. This, when we are exposed to chemicals, we have the impact on environment and on humans is higher. And in the legislation, we basically recognize two different types of mixtures, or it's one are the intentional mixtures, like mixtures which we produce for purpose, like for example paints, sealants, or detergents, cosmetics, and so on. These mixtures, these intentional mixtures, are in principle quite well covered by the legislation. There is a requirement to assess them, and this is done by testing whole mixture or calculating actually toxicity of that and risk of that mixtures from individual components. Advantage of these mixtures, of these kind of known mixtures, is that you know more or less the composition of it, or you can handle it, you can catch it, or you can hold it in your hand and measure toxicity of it, for example, the effluents from the wastewater treatment plants. And then we have a so-called unintentional or incidental mixtures, where are basically the chemicals are coming from different sources into the environment. So something is coming from the use, something is production, and it's not really possible to know what is the composition. So we call it unintentional mixtures. And this is the main concern for us, these unintentional mixtures for the future, because current legislation does not really address this. We regulate chemicals basically one by one. We assume that the environment is clean when the chemical comes in, and we assess the risk only to the individual chemicals. Or we assume this intentional mixture, so we know what is coming and we consider this intentional mixture in one substance. But these unintentional mixtures, they are not addressed at all, except few cases, like for example in plant protection product regulation on the maximum residue levels, where we have a legislation requiring to assess a combined exposures from active substances of pesticides only, but only from pesticides, not, for example, from other sources. Next slide, please. So what are the key issues and which could help you probably to write the proposal for the research project? Is that, of course, to be successful in regulating or actually acting on risk from chemical mixture and intentional mixtures, we need to have a legal requirements for mixture. Some, as I mentioned, already exist, but more is needed. This job is more or less for us, the policy makers, and for the Commission, Council, and Parliament to adopt such a. But to be able to do so, we need to know information which is needed for the risk assessment of mixtures. So we need to know about toxicity and exposures. So some progress has been achieved for last several years, for some 10, 20 years. We have, of course, a REACH legislation coming into force and was implemented. So we have more information about the toxicity of data present and collected in the chemical database, which is handled by European Chemical Agency. We also have also tried to compile monitoring data from member states into the information platform for the chemical monitoring, IPChem, where we have some compilation of the data from member states in various media. We have also funded several projects like human monitoring for EU solutions, EDC mixes, which can actually bring us some additional data. But there are still gaps, and there will continue to be gaps, which I hope some of them address, and this is related to information or knowledge on toxicity and exposure. The other point is methodologies for risk assessment. So we know that we have a concentration addition as a default option. It seems to be sufficiently protective. Also, European Food Safety Authority is developing a methodology which is based cumulative assessment groups, where pesticides are grouped based on the organs which they affect, and the toxicity is calculated like only from those pesticides which act on the same organ. So this is a methodology called cumulative assessment group methodology. And then there is also EFSA, and that was also the EDC mixed risk project, which they tried to develop a probabilistic modeling to assess actually to which chemicals we are exposed to. EDC mixes was mainly dedicated to the food, but there is actually a need to understand, to actually have more tools and methodologies, how we could assess what we are exposed to, and also to predict perhaps the toxicity of mixtures which will be created. Then we have risk management approaches. So there are several which are, so how to actually go about this management of risk from mixtures. And there are several suggestions. There were some statements from scientists in the, I think it was published even this year in 2020. There were some workshops. And then there are different approaches. So we would focus on the priority mixtures. So we need to identify those which are priority mixtures, so those which are causing risk. As I mentioned, this is also to try to manage only those chemicals which act on the same organ. So this is these cumulative assessment groups. There was also idea to actually deploy effect-based monitoring tools. For example, instead of measuring chemical by chemical, monitor effects of waters, for example, so estrogenicity or androgenicity of waters, or and another approach which has been proposed was to actually apply a mixture assessment factor, so actually reduce the safe level for individual chemicals to account for potential interactions in the environment and humans with other chemicals. And so there are several proposals made, and there is also need little bit, I think we would also welcome to get some ideas from scientists how these proposals, new ones, if there are new ideas how to risk manage mixtures, but also how these different options and the different approaches could work together. So whether we have something different for pesticides, something for biocides, something for cosmetics, for industrial chemicals, whether there is any way how this could be put together. And the next slide, please. So just to recapitulate what was some examples of the research needs from our side, or what we could imagine to get, is that, of course, to fill the information or the knowledge gaps, which I meant it was the toxicity and exposures, improving risk assessment methodologies, so the tools for risk assessment, models, but also others. And then another thing would be to further develop the risk management approaches and concepts. So how to go about to identify priority mixtures. For example, we have this IPChem data platform where we compare all monitoring data. Are we able to identify some priority mixtures for waters, for humans, and so on? So what are those mixtures which we should pay attention maximum, which we should regulate? What is missing also is some kind of concept for mass flow of chemicals or proof of concept that this can work. So currently we really don't know, and authorities do not know, how much chemicals are actually emitted into the environment and how much they are used in technosphere. So there is no data requirements for that. So very often this is done based on a kind of ad hoc collections. But if there is any way, whether it could be a possibility to calculate such a mass flow, so it would be interesting to see whether such a concept could work. Another thing would be how to implement mixture assessment factors. So what would be the magnitude of MAF, how to apply it? Should be there one value, one MAF for all chemicals, or different? How this could work with other approaches, like, for example, the cumulative assessment groups. And as I mentioned before, to kind of assess and compare different regulatory approaches, how they could work together. And that's all from my side. I'm happy to help to answer some questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. I now have an echo. No, it's gone. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Peter, for this introduction. I have seen one question about if everything will be, I think the session is being recorded, and I expect it to be available afterwards for people who would like to listen to it again on the website of the RNA Days, and there you will probably also find the slides. So if I now move on, we will move to the presentation of the second topic, which corresponds to the introduction which Peter just have given. And I would like to hand over to Tuomo again to present this second topic.
Thank you. This topic has a very long title: Fostering Regulatory Science to Address Combined Exposure to Industrial Chemicals and Pharmaceuticals, from Science to Evidence-Based Policies. So this is a very much within the domain of regulatory science. So I think we are very happy that we are funding also these kinds of projects. So the specific challenge, I think this topic was proposed, of course, within the framework of the preparations for the new chemical strategy, which indeed mentions the issue of addressing chemical mixtures. Concerning the mentioning of the pharmaceuticals, this comes actually from the European Union strategic approach to pharmaceuticals in the environment, which was published last year in March. And if you go into this particular document, you can see that it's said under the Filling Knowledge Gaps chapter that the Commission will consider supporting further research, for example, on the possible effects of humans of chronic exposure to low levels of pharmaceuticals via the environment, taking account for the potential combined effects from multiple substances and of vulnerable subpopulations. So this was basically the driving force to include this specific focus on pharmaceuticals under this topic. And many of these issues here have already been mentioned by Peter in his introduction. So we know that the humans, wildlife, and animals are all exposed to these combinations, and there are many exposure routes. And we have a lot of scientific understanding now. For example, we have funded these EU projects on various aspects. For example, solutions, which was more focused on environmental mixtures, Euromix, basically on food, chemicals. HPN for EU has also a one work package dealing with chemical mixtures, EDC mix risk dealing with mixtures of endocrine disrupting chemicals, and there's something also in the EU tox risks project. So we are not starting from scratch. We do have already some data available from these projects, and this project organized a workshop in the Joint Research Center. I think it was a year or two ago, and there's a report available where they identified issues to be addressed. And there is a consensus indeed, the combination of chemicals do pose risks to ecosystem and human health. So next, please. I just have to move myself. So the scope is to demonstrate how we can actually have new tools and methodological approaches that are workable in the regulatory context that could be applied to identify, quantify, and prevent harmful co-exposures to industrial chemicals and pharmaceuticals. And in the topic text, actually, there is a definition of what we mean by industrial chemicals. So the applicants can again address some or all of the following. So please, there's no obligation to address all of them, because sometimes if you try to address too many things, then you have only a very superficial approach, and the evaluators will certainly pick this up, and they will give the applicants a lower score because of this. So the applicants can develop tools and methods to detect complex mixtures, compare different regulatory approaches to manage and then unintentional chemical mixtures and co-exposures, estimate the degree to which regulatory practice approaches underestimate or perhaps overestimate risks, and develop and apply modeling, statistics, and other methods to identify and study potential human health impacts. The proposals can also come up with scientific case studies to identify safety margins for specific unintentional exposures to combination of chemicals. Then work can be done on effects of human beings, including vulnerable subpopulations. And this part comes indeed from this pharmaceutical strategy in the environment that was published last year. Analyze EU data sources to generate insights into real-life exposures. And finally, improvement and validation of models for predict chronic exposure from combinations of chemicals. So here again, the same thing applies. So it's very important to consider these expected impacts in the application because it's an important criteria for evaluation. So scientific evidence to enable prevention and or mitigation of co-exposures to pharmaceuticals and industrial chemicals. Support the implementation of existing risk assessment and management approaches to reduce the most critical exposures. And this includes setting of limit values for exposures, taking into account co-exposures. Support the assessment of new regulatory approaches such as mixed assessment factors that was mentioned earlier. Support activities on combined exposures that are relevant to the strategic approach to pharmaceuticals and environment, and also what will be in the new chemical strategy that comes out just in a couple of weeks. In this case, we encourage the selected project to work together after they are selected to enhance the potential impact. So they should already at the proposal stage consider what kind of joint activities they could propose to optimize their synergies. Again, the data should be inserted into the IPChem platform. As far as the biomonitoring activities is concerned, again, there's this suggestion that they, at least a very strong recommendation, that they should use these reference laboratories that have been established by HPN4EU. And I mentioned earlier, we have in a footnote the definition of industrial chemicals. For this particular topic, we have 20 million euros available, and we are expecting to have smaller projects in the previous ones of between 4 and 6 million. And it is a research and innovation action. I think that was all from my part.
Yes. Thank you very much, Tuomo. I think we can have a couple of questions also on this presentation, and you must excuse me if I was not quick enough in publishing the questions which we answered before. I have tried to publish most of those. Some of them were, addressing the same issues, but I have published those we have answered. In this case, we have a question. If the proposals, and this is for you, Tuomo, if the proposals need to include the human component as a must, or could it include the impact of the environment also?
Yes, it can address both issues, human and the environmental effect.
Good. Then we have another question which just came in, which I then have to publish so that we can see it on the published question, which says, shall the scientific case studies be based on data already collected, or is it expected the biomonitoring campaigns are included? Tuomo, do you want to answer, or should, yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't see it. Can you repeat?
It is under the published question now, and it asks if it should be based on data already collected, or is it expected that biomonitoring campaigns are included?
I would say that with this budget available, you should use as much as possible available data, but it is not excluded in case you want to do some very targeted monitoring survey.
again, maybe to repeat that if you want to do human biomonitoring, you should please make use of both data and also other guidelines and laboratories available via the HBM4EU project. Are there any further questions? And yes, there is a new question. So I will publish this one also, and it is about if the proposal has to deliver on all the expected impact listed in the document of the call. Tuomo?
The answer is, I think I made it clear that they are not, the applicants are not obligated to address all the things that are on the list in the scope section. So if they don't address all of them, that means that they cannot necessarily address all of the expected impacts. But as long as you explain it in your proposal, this should be clear to the evaluators.
Yes, I think this is a very important point made, is when you make certain choices and you direct your proposal into a certain area and a certain selection of what you will address, you need to make it clear in the proposal why you have made those choices, why you have think that your proposal as it is developed and as it is proposed will actually contribute to the topic, as bring valuable assets to the topic as such. But it's very important to explain choices and to clarify why certain focus has been given. There is a new question again, which says exposures to pharmaceuticals during treatment plus environment is eligible. I have published it. I would say this is the idea behind the call was more the co-exposure due to pharmaceuticals present in the environment and the co-exposure with to pharmaceuticals and other chemicals, which we, unintentional. It was not the target of the call was not intentional exposure by taking drugs and then combining it with environmental exposures.
There's a question for the topic 8.1. Do phenol compounds, are they included as pollutants covered by this topic? I would say that yes, if they are persistent and mobile, but I'm not a chemist, so maybe Valentina can answer this.
Yes, indeed. I think that some phenols could classify as persistent and mobile, but again, I would invite to look at the criteria in the publication that I have indicated, where you can see persistent, we use the criteria of Annex 13 of REACH, and for mobile, there are some physical-chemical properties, including water solubility and low KUC to be checked to see if they can be identified as mobile.
We have another question about there is one question, I'm sorry to those who it has come from an anonymous person. The question is not clear to me. It's about how will projects be evaluated that focus on certain issues and are linked to in the proposal stage to other projects. It is not really clear to me what the question is about, but there is another question which came in, which I will publish now, which is linked to degradation products. Should degradation products also be addressed in mixtures or only registered parent substances? Peter, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, sure. I think it should be, it can be addressed in the call. I think the toxicity, especially in the environment, but also in humans, come also from the degradation products, sometimes can be even higher than from the original substance. So definitely, yes.
Okay, and then I'm just looking at what else is coming in. I think we are reaching the, another question. So can heavy metals be considered relevant for this topic? Peter, I think this is for you too again.
I think yes. I think everything which we consider to be a substance, which metals are, so yes, it could be considered. The toxicity comes also from metals.
Okay, and then I think we are reaching the end of the questions. If there is anything very important which I have missed, could you please type it in again in the Q&A? Okay, I think there is nothing else coming in at the moment. So I hope that we have managed to give you a good overview of the policy background to why these topics. There was just one more question coming in finally, is how much, now it starts, lots of questions coming in. So there is one question which says, how much is fetal exposure considered? Tuomo, would you like to answer that one?
Well, there's no prescription how much. It's more that we know very well, but there are some very critical windows of exposure in fetal life that are important for later effects. So in this context, of course, the applicants have the possibility to address this particular aspect, but there's no, I wouldn't say a recommendation that they should focus on fetal life. But if they consider that it's scientifically justified, yes, certainly can be covered.
And then there is another question about if there's any specific class of pharmaceuticals that should be addressed. And I think here the best is that we refer to you to this strategy about pharmaceuticals in the environment. So if we look at those which are the mostly occurrent in the environment and who pose the biggest risk for these long-term chronic exposures, and eventually then also looking at interesting combination with other chemicals to which we are exposed at the same time. I have something in the chat also. No, there is nothing in the chat. So I will try again. Any further questions which we have not answered?
I'm happy to see, I'm not so how accurate it is. It looked like we had about 150 people logged in for this session.
Okay, I have one question which comes back again. I will try to publish it so that we can all see it. It says actually well, the question is about if two proposals are linked in the proposal writing, each proposal will be evaluated independently. So if you foresee collaboration between two proposals, you of course need to take into account the risks that one of them not being funded and the other one being funded. So they will all be evaluated independently. And there is a new question. I'll just publish it so that we can all see it. With regards to building regulatory science in Horizon 2020 project Gov4Nano, there is a structural approach being developed to link science to regulatory risk assessors dealing with nanotechnologies. Are nanotechnologies included in this call? Tuomo, would you like to answer?
This is for topic 8.1, I suppose, which.
And there is another topic also, there is another question also again about nanomaterials. Peter, would you like to say something about how you consider nanomaterials in this question of mixtures?
I don't have a particular consideration for nanomaterials. For me, it's a part of chemical universe. So as they contribute to the overall toxicity and they are used in different applications and they end up also in the environment, I think as part could be covered also in the mixture. So I don't see any problem with that.
I think the most important is that you really justify why you make certain selections.
And of course, it should be oriented towards the mixture effects or mixture questions, no? Not about just purely the nanomaterials toxicity itself. So,
yes, I agree. Okay, let's try again. Any more questions? There is something in the chat. Yes, this is the same question. So we have addressed this question. And I can see there is a new did somebody just type a new question which I by mistake maybe deleted when I was trying to publish the other question? If that is the case, could you please type it in again? Let's just wait for a few minutes. If not, and if there are no further questions at this stage, I would like to thank everybody who has attended the session, even if we could not see you. I hope that you could at least, yeah, there it came, the question. It is again about multi-component nanomaterials and advanced materials. As Peter replied before, things which are part of the chemical universe can be considered, but of course what we want to target here is not the nano effects, but really the mixture effects. So this is what you really need to focus on. Then there is a question, I think, to Valentina. If chlorinated ethylenes are still of interest for European research. I don't know, Valentina, if you can say something about that.
So if we find them, if they are persistent and mobile, if they contaminate in the water resources, they could be. But on the top of my mind, I mean, I don't know. I must say that I don't know. They are not among the substances we are dealing with under REACH in this moment.
Yeah. And there is a second question also again for the first topic about how much respiratory dust and nanoparticles are considered. Again, I think in the slides you will find this link to the definition of persistent and mobile chemicals, which will allow you to understand what the topic is focusing on.
And I would say that the exposure route as such, it should be the one that is relevant, but it's not excluded that you may have inhalation as an exposure route.
Yes. Okay, I think I hope we have answered all the questions. Any last bits for any questions which you still would like to have an answer on? And maybe just to repeat, because I was reading again some of the questions coming up. We are really looking at the unintentional exposures. So not the intentional exposures, not materials which are composite materials and therefore lead to exposure to intentional mixtures. What we're really looking at are the unintentional mixtures which occur because we are exposed to the environment we live in, and therefore suddenly things which were not foreseen to reach our body at the same time or to reach the environment at the same time are reaching the environment and our bodies at the same time and causing problems. And there is a general question, will the presentations be available? Yes, I expect that the presentations and the recording will be available on the RNI Days website. Okay. So yes, there is another question here, Tuomo, maybe for you, and I have just published it. It says, if we are encouraged to develop joint activities with other applicants, where may we find information, contact details about applicants? I think when Tuomo is referring to joint activities, it is to foresee that after the project, if your proposal is selected and we have a set of projects in this area, we will strongly encourage these projects to interact with each other and to really share knowledge, share information, and maybe organize joint workshops. We find it very, very useful for projects from the same topic and sometimes even from other topics to interact and really to build on common knowledge. Tuomo, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, so you can be a little bit generic here when you describe these possible joint activities, but unfortunately, we can, of course, not give you any information about the other applicants, so you cannot really specifically know what will be the other project. But you can see the general scope of the topic, and from this you can guess what kind of possible project that will be selected.
Yes, and then we have another question coming in again, a little bit repeating what has been asked before already. And I will maybe let Peter answer this one. It says again, are mixtures including microplastics relevant for this last call? So we're down to the question about microplastics. Peter, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I haven't given the thought to include microplastic in this. I would imagine that as a general contribution to the yes, but I wouldn't have imagine to have a call to have a project only about the microplastics. So
no,
if it's as additional substance which we are exposed to together with the others, I would not exclude them. I would keep them in, but to have a specific only about microplastic, not especially because we have a specific calls for microplastics, as you mentioned before.
Yes. So again, it's really about focusing on the mixture aspect and what that generates as effects. Okay. Any last? There is a question in the chat. Will the partner search be open on the participant platform? Tuomo, can you answer that one? I expect yes. So.
I don't really know. This is a technical aspect, so I haven't heard anything about it. So I suppose that normally we do have it, so I would guess it would be here also.
Yes. Okay. So let's try again. Any last questions which are burning and which we absolutely need to answer now? Again, my advice to you is really the most important is that you carefully read the topic text and that you reflect on what is asked for in the topic text. I would also like again to say that our slides are not the legal binding document. The legal binding document is really the published call and topic text. Okay. I see no more questions at this stage. I'll just wait another minute in case another question comes in before I try closing the session again. There is a question about how many projects are expected to be accepted considering the budget. I think that is a mathematical question at this stage. we have a budget in this case of 20 million euros. We suggest, we consider the proposals requesting a contribution between 4 to 6 million would allow the specific challenge to be addressed in case of the mixtures, which means that as an average, we will be able to fund around 4 projects.
And from experience, I would say that unfortunately, the applicants always come very close to the top of the limit. So it's not a requirement that when it says 4 to 6, that you put in a proposal that will need 6 million. You can very well have something a little bit less. So it's not.
Yeah. Okay. I think we then everybody has had a chance to ask questions. I would thank very much for all the people who have attended the session. I'm sorry for the little bit the mix up in the beginning, and I would especially also like to thank all the speakers and our colleagues, especially our colleagues from DG Environment who joined us for this call, which is very important. And it is a little bit, I must admit, a new situation for us also not to be able to see who we are actually interacting with and not to be able to take questions directly, but to have to read them. But I hope that we managed to answer the questions you had, and we look forward to seeing a lot of very good proposals to these 2 topics. I think you have heard that we are really expecting good proposals, good projects, and then at the end, good results also, which we can then really use for further development of the different strategies. I would just like, Valentina, would you like to say any closing words?
No, to summarize it. And I also can hear an echo, so maybe it's better if I don't speak too much.
Okay, Peter?
Thank you very much for those who participated, and please make the proposals. We want to have things to choose from. Thank you.
Okay, Tuomo, any last word from you?
Yeah, I join Sophie in saying that we expect very good proposals. I'm sorry that we will ruin your Christmas, because I'm sure until January you will be all very busy. We know it's lots and lots of work to prepare a proposal, but it is hopefully rewarding at the end.
Yes. So thank you very much again, and I think we can then close this session. And you will find slides and I suppose also recording on the RNI Days website afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mm.